All right. And we should be good to go. All right, here. All right, so week 2. We did all this stuff already. We're just moving on. Okay? We did the updates. Okay, so can we get quiet, please? All right, thank you. All right, so InfoSec professionals, we are really entrusted with a couple of things. Number one, we are responsible for protecting our organization's most valuable assets, but also the data that we're entrusted with, our customers' data, our employees' data. Okay. Now, we are entrusted, and we also have to have these high ethical, moral standards. So, as part of the policy, one of the things when we get to the policy will probably be around background checks. Okay. Background checks help us to fish out people who maybe have low ethical standards. Okay. Give you an example from a company I worked for. Maybe I've already used this example for something else in this class, but a guy has a laptop with company. Well, let's back up. Guy has a laptop with another company's data that he worked at. Okay. He gets hired. Our policy is you do not take any data from your employer that you came from to here. The reality is we had no teeth behind the policy. There was no enforcement mechanism. There was no like punching him in the face if he does this sort of thing. You're going to get written up. There was no type of teeth behind it. So what does he do? He keeps the data from his other employer, brings it along, and starts using it. Okay. He clearly didn't have high ethical or moral standards. Our process did not weed him out. Okay. Now, something happens, he gets fired. We lock him out of his laptop. But being the creative guy that he is with no moral standards, goes to Best Buy, to the Geek Squad, tells them that, hey, I locked myself out of my laptop. Can you get the data off from my hard drive? Okay. The person at the Geek Squad says, sure, no problem at all, bro. And does it. Okay. And now he has all our corporate data because of a couple of things. Number one, even though we said we had high standards, we didn't enforce them. But number two, we didn't protect that data properly. We didn't have encryption on it. If we had encrypted that data with a key, if we had encrypted his hard drive, even if Best Buy had been able to go and pull his hard drive out, it would have been useless data for him. Okay. And we tried to do some things. Okay. We locked him out of his machine. We were limited because we hadn't thought about these things ahead of time. Okay. If we think about these things ahead of time, we have a policy, we have an implementation. So say, is anybody doing like access management? Was that you guys, Jim? Okay. So thinking about it from the perspective, if you put people on a domain or you put them on an identity access program and you have it tied to their encryption on, say, their laptop. When you revoke their access, you revoke their access to the encryption as well, which means they cannot unlock it. Only your IT department can now unlock it. Okay? That's why with File Vault, you get the code if you do it yourself, but you can also tie it into your IT department, where IT department can then revoke your access on the Mac. PC, I presume, is similar using Windows credentials and Windows Active Directory. Okay? But we are entrusted, so we have to have the highest ethical standards. Okay? I've been asked, and I know if some of you have heard this story, I'm sorry you have to hear it again, but I've been asked to do very unethical things. Okay? So I promptly put my phone on speakerphone in Costco and let everybody in the Costco in Temecula hear the CEO and the COO ordering me to basically violate Canadian data privacy law. No, of course not. And then I said, well, I guess you're going to have to fire me. Okay? And they knew they couldn't fire me, okay? Because they knew that there would be a lot of issues if they fired me. So guess what they ended up doing? Figuring out how to comply with data privacy law in Canada. Now, I will say it wasn't quite that simple because I have told some of you the jumpsuit story, right? So I told the CEO that if they liked wearing orange jumpsuits, then that would be totally fine if they wanted to do that, but I wasn't going to facilitate it, okay? It's a story I love to tell. Really great in interviews. But anyways, you need to have high ethical standards, okay? And I'm not willing to compromise, and none of you should be willing to compromise. It doesn't matter if the CEO is breathing down your neck to do something, okay? You can't cave in these areas. You're entrusted with those most critical assets. If you're going to cave, don't go into this field, okay? Okay, you've got to have a backbone. You've got to stand up for what's right, all right? All right, so ethics in InfoSec context, excuse me. There's a whole write-up about ethics in the book, okay? This isn't an ethics class. I'm not going to go into ethics other than just covering it very briefly here. But if you want to read all about the ethics in general, it's actually an interesting subject. Ethics and moral problems and things were my favorite subjects in undergrad, but and any philosophy course for that matter. But the reality is outside the scope of this course in terms of those details. What matters though is what is right, what is wrong, what do others think is right or wrong, and how are we going to use ethics in practice, okay? I gave you an example of how I used it. Oops. So you should really read page 69. I didn't want to reproduce the details there. It's pretty wordy, but it's a good amount. If I'm going to focus on material, I'm going to tell you some areas to focus on and make sure you read, okay? So ethics education, we want to train people on expected behaviors, practical scenarios, and raising awareness. So as part of the overall security training, one area that we didn't even think about probably here was ethics. Okay? If you're faced with a decision, how do you pick the right decision? Okay, and we train based on expected behaviors. So if we expect people to behave a certain way, we want to understand how they would respond to that. We want to build a practical scenario. Okay, so let me give you an example. If someone were to decide that, hey, my group might be interested in doing something on ethics. Okay. Although a lot of the ethics stuff tends to be more in sales training, but teach their own. Customer says, I need my system to be compliant with CCPA, for example, okay? And we say, yeah, we're compliant with CCPA, okay? But in reality, to get to compliance with CCPA, we actually have to do a bunch of things. Do we tell the customer that we're actually not compliant, but we can get compliant, or we just tell the customer compliant? Well, the ethical thing is to be honest, okay? Yeah, we're gonna have to do X, Y, and Z to get there. Okay? Not just we're there. Next one, deterrence. So we're trying to prevent the unwanted behaviors by threatening the punishment. Okay, so the federal government systems say, and James, you were telling me, was it you that had that job in the area you were talking about earlier? Okay, yeah, you don't have to say more than that. So the federal government has warnings on every computer system. This is a federal government computer system warning. Unauthorized access will be punishable by death. Okay, firing squad, whatever it is. I don't remember what it says anymore. I used to have to write those things, but I remember, right? We threaten punishment. We hope that we deter people from trying to get into those systems. The reality is there are going to be people who are persistent no matter what we say, okay? So we have to have a threat of punishment. So if I say, if you break into the system, I'm going to arrest you. But then if it happens, I just say, oh, okay, just don't do it again, okay? That's a problem. Now, I worked for an organization a long time ago. This is a long time ago. And we had an employee who had privileged access to all of our systems, okay? He left the organization voluntarily, but he left the organization. He was still buddies with my boss. My boss kept his accounts around, okay? Just in case he ever needed his help. Well, he goes in and he just starts tinkering with things. He wasn't an employee anymore. He didn't have access anymore. He shouldn't have gone in. The deterrence was we had these things that said, if this is a government system, if you get into this thing, this is bad. He didn't care because you know what? Nobody was going to say anything to him. I was doing forensics on something, and I found that he had been logging in. And actually, even worse, assuming the root user, because whoever controlled the root user never changed the password. Okay? They weren't using any type of vaulting or anything. I reported it to the leadership. It was swept under the rug. I reported it again at another level leadership. It was swept under the rug. No one seemed to care. So I reported it to the CIO. They actually had to do an investigation at that point. Okay. But they never punished the guy. They just said, please don't do it again, and they disabled his account. There was no punishment. I bet you the guy probably found some other backdoor to get in and was poking around in these systems. Okay? We want to make sure any punishment we threaten, we actually are willing to follow up. So if that means we're going to go, send you the district attorney and prosecute you, we're going to contact the FBI. We need to have a policy and a procedure for doing that so we actually can show we have teeth. Okay? All right, so our responsibilities are to deter unethical and illegal acts. We use policy, education, and training, and then controls. Okay? So from the technical side, we tend to use controls, which are driven by policy. Okay. So unethical behavior, we have ignorance, we have accident, and we have intent. By the way, when we're talking specifically about compliance laws, most of them, there's no concept of ignorance. Just because you're ignorant of the law doesn't mean you're forgiven. Okay? You're expected. And if you're ignorant of the law, who cares? You're still responsible, which is why when you're building these programs, they need to be very extensive and cover a lot of areas. Okay? Okay. So we do things like the security and education training awareness programs, and we also have policies and procedures to try to deter this behavior. These are posted, by the way, in case you didn't see them already. I think I posted them a couple days ago. So the deterrence criteria, fear. Gosh, I'm scared that something might happen. I might get caught. Okay. The probability of getting caught. If we have the systems in place, and Chris, this might be the area you were talking about, the logging and being able to do that, if you're looking at that, if we have really good auditing, really good logging, okay, we have a really good SIEM in place, we're going to increase the probability of someone getting caught and therefore increase the probability of the penalty that we end up assessing. Okay. Now, the penalty is a policy decision by the organization. It could be legal action. It could be action in a court of equity as opposed to a court of law. So legal being you're going to pay me money. Equity being more of an injunction. Okay. No, this is not a law class, but that's really just the main thing is equity is more of an injunction, not monetary damages. Okay. So either they're going to be having to pay something monetary or there's an injunction against them, or criminal law, which is, well, as a business, we can't go and file criminal charges, but what we can do is turn over our information to the FBI, local law enforcement, and then they can pursue criminal charges. Okay. So your policy might be if we find any evidence of any malicious activities, then we will turn over all materials to local law enforcement and the FBI. Okay. And then they might actually go after criminal prosecution. We as a company, we can't prosecute anyone. Okay. The worst that we can do is go into the court of law or equity. Here in the US, they're effectively the same thing, and just the damages are different. And we can say, well, we want to sue. Sorry, I picked on you, Jim. Jim's hacked into our system. For the people on the phone or on the video here, he didn't really do this. This is just a scenario. Okay. Hypothetical. Jim Smith, we'll call him. Okay. Jim Smith hacks into the system. We find out that he hacked into the system. Okay. We get all the records. Our policy states that if an employee accesses a system that they are not authorized to do, a couple of things are going to happen. Number one, we're going to turn over all the information to law enforcement for potential prosecution. Okay. Number two, we're going to terminate him on the spot. Okay. Number three, we're going to seek monetary damages against him. Okay. That might be our deterrent in terms of a penalty. Okay. Now, Jim Smith over here, are you going to go and do this now based on those penalties? Okay. Now, let me ask you another scenario. Our policy says we are going to get very upset with our employees if they do this sort of thing, and we're not going to let them go on the next company-wide event. Now, would you maybe do it? If you're an unethical person, maybe, okay? It depends, okay? So let's just assume that Jim Smith is unethical. We're not going to deter him from that if we have a very light slap on the wrist, okay? We need to have a really strong punishment. And let's assume Chris is our IT person and he's actually developed this really great logging system that captures everything. You can't walk to the restroom without him knowing about it, okay? If that's the case, the probability of getting caught is high, okay? If we go and have myself go do it, okay, I'm not going to have the time to go and set something up, so you probably aren't going to have as high a probability of getting caught simply because I just don't have the time to do that. So it's probably not as high of a level of logging, okay, as if Chris did it. Okay. All right, so effectiveness, the implementation of all three of those criteria is needed to ensure that people are compliant with policies. Okay. Now, professional codes of conduct, excuse me. Some organizations have professional codes of conduct, okay, or ethics. And this can mean you lose your certification if you have one. So how many here want to go after a security certification at some point? And I remember you talking to me about it, okay? Beware, if you sign those things and it helps you to get a job, because certifications, security ones in particular, are very valuable. Some of you know Gordon, he's come and spoke to some of my classes. Those are valuable to him. It probably increases earning potential. I don't know how much, but probably increases earning potential substantially. Okay, there's an economic impact. So if he violated, or any of you violated a code of ethics, there would be a huge penalty. You could lose that certification, which could mean you might lose your job. Okay, that's hopefully enough deterrent to ensure that you act ethically. Okay, same thing with like people who are members of the bar. I don't practice law. I don't have a license. I never took the bar exam. Okay. But if someone takes the bar exam, they're held to a higher standard. Now, even though I went to law school, I'm still held to a higher standard. But if you're a member of the bar, you lose your license for unethical behavior. Okay? ABA can influence professional behavior as well. The American Medical Association could probably do the same thing for doctors. Okay? If you lose your license to practice law, or you lose your license to do medicine, or you lose your certifications for security, your earning potential is probably substantially lower. So you don't want to take that risk, all right? All right, so some examples of professional organizations, okay? Association for Computing Machinery. This one I actually encourage you, if you can join, it's very useful for this field, okay? I was a member and I have not gotten around to filling out the thing and sending it back to renew it, but it's a good organization. They publish some really good magazines that you get as part of your membership. And there's a lot of affiliate discounts. So if you don't have, when you leave school, if you don't have health insurance, you can probably get it at a discounted rate. There's a lot of benefits of joining a professional association. Another one is the ISC, okay, for info security there. SANS is another. ISACA, if you're interested in auditing, okay. And then there's the ISA as well. There's all examples. They may have discount rates for students. Usually you can join as a student pretty cheap, but when you actually graduate, it kind of goes up, okay. ABA was really cheap when I was a student. Okay, it's not cheap for me now, hundreds of dollars. All right. Information security and the law, you need to have a basic understanding of legal frameworks. It's not a law class. It's not something that you need to be an expert on. You have lawyers in your business for that. But everybody needs to understand the very basics of the legal system of where you operate. Okay. So and this starts with just at a basic level, the types of law. Okay? There's constitutional law. This is things like the U.S. Constitution, okay? State constitutions, bylaws, charters, that sort of thing. That kind of fits into the constitutional law. Another category is statutory law. This is when Congress or your state legislature makes law. So like the CCPA is state legislator law. Okay? They made it there. Then there's regulatory law, which is the executive branch. So it's a regulatory agency in the executive branch or presidential executive orders. Okay, that's that type of law. Regulatory agencies could be like the FCC, the FTC, FAA, I don't know what else, USDA, things like that. Okay. Common law, this is when judges make decisions. So you go to court, you get a decision. You don't like the decision, you go to the appellate court. Okay, and at the federal level, the appellate court's called the circuit. Does anybody know, just a little factoid, does anybody know why it's called that? The circuit. But do you know why they're called circuit courts? It's actually an old origin. It's because back in the day, justices had to ride their horse, and that was generally like the distance they could ride in a certain amount of time. So they had a circuit of where they could ride. That's where the name comes from. It's really stupid, right? Common law is unique okay, to the US, UK, and other countries like that, whereas it's compared to like, well, in the US, Louisiana is the only state that has Napoleonic civil code. There are no common law decisions in Louisiana. And that's because everything is codified in a book. When you go to court, it's based on what's in the book. Okay, there's no like discretion for the judges. They have a different legal system in Louisiana. It's the only state like that. You go to France. Okay? Anybody been in France? Okay. France courts are really funny. Okay? Here, we're very serious in our courts. There's a certain decorum. Okay. In France, I went there with my class when I was in law school, and we were sitting there and we were ordered to be quiet. Okay? But it didn't matter if we were quiet or not because the lawyer was chewing the biggest gumball I've ever seen in my life. Okay, and you could see it. And she's bouncing a ball against the wall behind the judge, almost hit him a couple times. Okay, when we went in, we were told they had already made a decision. Okay, whether the person was guilty or not was already codified in the Napoleonic Code for France. Okay? You don't go to court to go plead your case. Okay, it's just to determine how you're going to be punished. You're already guilty when you get to court there. Okay, it's very different than here. Okay, that's because we have common law. That's based on the English system of law. Okay, where every court makes a decision, and if it's a certain level of court, then it has precedence over future decisions. Okay, generally, if you do something at the district court, it goes to appeal, and it's appealed, and either it's overturned or not. Whatever that decision is by the appellate court is, we call it, oh my God, I forgot the name of it, precedent for that circuit. It's optional for all the other circuits. So that's where you run into things like the Ninth Circuit maybe decides a case, and maybe that court is more liberal, and you go to another circuit and it's more conservative. You'll get two different decisions. Sometimes those will end up at the Supreme Court as a result because the Ninth Circuit agreed this way. All the Ninth Circuit cases are being decided this way based on that precedent. The Second Circuit maybe has got a different feeling and does it a different way. And someone says, well, the Ninth Circuit said this, the Second Circuit said this. We think we want the Supreme Court to hear it. Okay? So then the Supreme Court gets to make the ultimate call of whether to hear a decision or not, or overrule it. If the Supreme Court says, nope, we're not going to hear it, that's it. Whatever the circuit court said stands until another issue comes up that's different. Okay. So these things all work together to form the law here. Now, on top of that, actually going back one, there's another form of law, and it's international law. Okay. And it's funny, I just got off the phone with my dad before I came over here, and he goes off about weird tangents, but I guess we're a lot alike. But international law. He's famous for telling me that we're a country that is its own thing, okay? And we're not subject to the laws of the world. And that's what he says to me. The reality is we agreed to follow certain international laws. Not all international law applies to us, by the way, okay? We have to agree, the Congress has to agree to be bound by certain international laws. And why is this important to this class? Because some of the areas we talk about in where's it at? IP. IP is a big area for international law. So a lot of international treaties that we've signed are based on things like IP law. I don't care. The environmental stuff, yeah, we signed that stuff. That's not relevant to this course. I won't talk about it. But I want to talk about some things that we've agreed to as a country, and all of the other countries that signed on to it agree to it. So the way we protect trade secrets and patents and copyrights and things like that, okay? These things are all agreed to by multiple countries, and so it means we have to treat things a certain way. So if we have an IP issue, we have to think about not only the US laws that apply, but if it's involving an international entity stealing it, okay? So say we open an entity in, I don't know, China. They signed on to these agreements too, okay? And let's just say one of our employees in our China office steals our IP, okay, and gives it to someone else. We don't just get to go say, hey, we're going to go to US court and fight this out. We have to think about those international laws as well, okay? Because we are bound by those laws, and China is bound by those laws as well. Now, anything involving international is going to be extremely complicated, and it requires like a special breed of lawyer who's very familiar with that, okay? So you're talking a lot of money to prosecute something like that if you have an issue like that. Same with patent infringements, copyright infringements, trademark infringements, okay? It's a lot easier when it's someone here in the US, very difficult when it involves an overseas matter, okay? All right, so within any of those areas I just mentioned, we have different types of laws, okay? Civil laws, these are things like contracts, okay? Employment law, torts. Tort is the civil law equivalent, or I shouldn't say equivalent. Torts is a similar action to what you would see in criminal law, except that you can't send someone to prison for committing a tort, okay? A tort is just a wrong. It's just a fancy word for committing a wrong against someone, okay? With torts, we want to right the wrong. So an example of a tort is trespass to chattel. So basically trespass to someone's personal property. A chattel is just personal property, okay? Or trespass to land. That's a tort. So if my neighbor's dog comes into my yard and destroys a chair in my yard, that's trespass to my chattel, okay? If they come into my yard and they destroy something on my physical real estate, okay, that's trespass to land, okay? If they completely destroy my car, that's conversion, because they basically converted that property of mine. That's a tort. These are all torts. Some other ones are intentional infliction of emotional distress, negligence. These are all different types of torts, just to give you an illustration, okay? I can go after for monetary damages. I can go after for an injunction to stop the person from doing it, okay? That's it. I can't throw them in jail. Believe me, I've heard my dad say that at family reunions. Like, wait, I'm going to sue this guy. He stole my smoker. Really? True story. Still talking about it years later, 20 years later, someone stole a smoker. I'm going to sue this guy, okay? Can't do it, okay? He can't get him thrown in jail either. Family law is another one, okay? Criminal law, we can't do anything about criminal law. The best that we can do is give the evidence to the police or the district attorney or the FBI, and they can then prosecute and throw someone in jail, okay? So if someone pisses you off and steals your property, you can't go to your employee and say, I'm going to get you thrown in jail, okay? You can't get anyone thrown in jail personally. You can give evidence, and if there's enough evidence, the district attorney or the U.S. Attorney's Office can get someone thrown in jail, okay? Public, this is regulating laws between government entities and those government relationships. So things like the FAA has laws for how aircraft are supposed to be managed, okay? And then there's private laws between individuals and organizations. This is just things like if you have a homeowners association, okay? It's not a law in the traditional sense. It's more of a agreement. When you buy your house, you agree to follow the rules of your homeowners association, okay? Now, there's a lot of different InfoSec laws, specific ones. These might help you when you're thinking about things like the IP theft, if you're looking at that, okay? There's a lot of specific laws there. They also govern things like, let's say you're Apple, okay? And you develop a new form of media that's like a DVD, okay? And you encrypt it. And then, okay, who shall I pick on? Jasmine. All right. Jasmine comes along and figures out how to crack that new form of like a DVD, okay? That's probably a violation of the Digital Millennium Copyright Act because it violates, say, Apple's copyright on that mechanism they have for protecting their property, okay? So then they could go after you under the DMCA, which is one of those laws, I believe, that's mentioned in the book, okay? You're not expected to know those laws, okay, by any means, but you should be aware of them because I honestly don't know if the book randomly picked questions where they might know, like, you know, what law is this? You know, the DMCA applies to this type of action. It's not going to require you know the text of the law. It's going to require you know basically the summary, maybe, okay, if you get any of those questions. And the exam should already be out there. Does class have an exam? Yeah? Okay. I get confused. My other class doesn't. Yeah, 411 doesn't have one. Okay. So, NIST. Anybody heard of NIST before? So, National Institute of Standards and Technology, they define standards for a number of things like computer systems, security, privacy, okay? They have procedures for how you test systems and how you should patch your systems. They don't usually mention specific technologies unless it's in reference to an example. It's not like the government says, you must use SolarWinds monitoring. They don't say that sort of thing. They say, you must use a tool that allows you to monitor all of your network devices. Okay? You must have a security incident management tool. Okay? These are the federal privacy laws. Okay? But just be aware there are no breach laws at the federal level. Okay? You want a breach law at the federal level, you need to move to Europe because they have them there. Okay? And please take me to Europe if you're going to move there. Individual states still have privacy breach laws. We have them here in California. Other states have them as well. Okay. So those can impact your data. You want to make sure you comply. So you're really looking at, for some of these things like compliance, you really have to look at what do these things require. And I'll tell you, how many of you remember that took the class before this one, the cloud one, the Secure Controls Framework? You remember that? That website I went to, I could pick the privacy law or whatever I needed to comply with. It would add it to a list and I would get an Excel spreadsheet. Who is doing this one? Q6 and 4, you should look at the Secure Controls Framework website. Pick the ones that you're going to focus on. It will tell you the things you need to comply with, which will help you then both from a policy and procedure perspective later, if you decide to do that as well for that portion, also from a training perspective of what you should really expect to do, okay? And then these are the other two privacy laws that I already mentioned. You can track new laws there on that website, okay? Not for this class, but just in general, if you're interested, you can track them there, okay? I mentioned the DMCA. There's also some other things, Australia has one, okay? The PCI standard, if you're doing credit cards, that could apply. And policy. So policy is written like laws, but the ignorance of laws is not an excuse. You still will go to jail. You still will get fined. Right? If you have ignorance of a policy, though, you're not going to go to jail, okay? Because it's not a law. It's similar, but it's not the same thing. Okay. Now, your policies internally, you're going to distribute them to everybody, make sure everybody's aware of them. You're going to probably, if you have employees that speak other languages other than English, you're going to want to translate them. Now, one thing you can do as an organization, you can say that our official language for the company is English, okay? And then say if you don't, you could just, I guess you could basically hire people who don't have a basic competence in English. That could be your policy, okay? Absent that, say you do operate in other countries where you have people who speak other languages, then you really need to translate into the other languages that you support in your business. Now, Oracle's policy has always, as far as I know, has always been English is the official language that we conduct business in. Although we do have people who speak other languages, all of our business is going to be transacted in English. That's in their policy. Okay? Now, the reality is not everybody does that, but that's, because their policy probably doesn't have enough teeth. You also need to make sure that disabled employees have accessibility in these policies. You can't enforce a policy if not everybody has access to it, okay? It needs to be acknowledged. So generally you have a consent form and when you hire people and you update your policies, you make everybody sign them. Now, practically speaking, after you've hired people, it can be very difficult to get people to sign policies. So in your policy, you probably have when they get hired, you probably have in the offer letter mentioning that, by accepting this offer, you agree to comply with all of our policies and that you agree to review them and sign them, sign any consent forms that happen along the way, okay? And the other thing is executives are not special. It doesn't matter who you are, whether you're a janitor or the CEO, everybody's applied the same policy equally, okay? And then if those are adhered to, then the penalties are probably enforceable without a lawsuit if someone does it. So you could fire someone if that's what your policy states, and they probably wouldn't be able to go back and sue you because they've agreed to that policy, okay, in exchange for employment. Now, you might have liability even if no laws are broken because, say, PCI or there might be jurisdiction things with all these different laws. So you've got to think about that. You could have potential liability. So a lot of companies make sure that they have due care, due diligence, and that they have insurance up the wazoo for incidents like this, okay? There are insurance companies for businesses that will pretty much insure just about anything. You just have to know where to look. Get a good insurance agent that knows these things. If your insurance agent says, oh, it's not possible, go find a different insurance agent who does think it's possible, okay? Law enforcement, there's some stuff there. Forensics and e-discovery, that portion's a huge portion, 8 pages long. I wasn't about to make slides for it, okay? Please read up on it, though. It's probably relevant to some of you, depending on where you go with your career, and there might be things on the test for that, okay? With that, we got out a few minutes early, okay, tonight. So by next week, please figure this out for your next Scrum update, okay? If you didn't get your Scrum update in for this week, do it before I check them tomorrow afternoon, all right?